Welcome to the Reel to Reel podcast, where the stories behind the board go on record. We're here to give you an insider's look into the music industry. I'm joined by my co-host Drigo from the Melrose Audio Center, and our guests Maggie Finley, Isra Batista, and David Brown. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, Bruce.
Hey, how you doing?
Well, why don't we start with Maggie and just give us a short little introduction, and then we'll dive right into topics.
All right. So a short introduction is that I have been doing a radio show on WPRK, which is 91.5 FM, for the past 23 years. It's called, I know, right? I can't believe it myself. It's called Punk Rock in Your PJs. And it plays every Tuesday night. I used to do it from 11 p.m. to 1 in the morning, but after the pandemic, everything kind of shifted. And I also had a full-time job where I have to get up at 6 in the morning on Wednesdays. So I instead now do the show from 11 p.m. to midnight, which is still late, but it works out.
Well, Isra, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little background?
Yeah, I'm Isra Batista. Been in the industry for almost 20 years. Been a musician for 22 years now. Wow. Used to be the owner of, I'm kind of still the owner of Riverbear Studios. And my current niche is that I do music for wrestlers.
Very cool.
We're going to talk about it.
Very cool. And David, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is David Brown, and I moved to Central Florida around 1982. Prior to that, I was, of course, in bands and stuff, and had my own studio in Jacksonville before I moved here. And started my own freelance to work for other studios in town for a few years, and started my own studio in 1990. And I've been doing it pretty much ever since.
And a fine studio it is, I might add.
Well, thank you. You've been here a couple times.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that we wanted to talk about is, I know, David, you have had a long history with audiobooks, and it's a topic that we haven't really talked about on the show. So maybe you want to explain a little bit of that, or?
Sure. Well, I don't do a lot of audiobooks. I mean, we have over the course of the history of the studio. I started out, of course, purely music in my Jacksonville studio. And then when I came down here, I actually came down to run a record company, the everyday operations of a record company. And after about 5 years, that ended, and it's a story unto itself. But so I started freelancing again, and I ended up getting a job in post audio, where I was mixing film, television, episodic television. And I did that for 5 years, long enough to, I think, figure out how that process works. So, and then through the course of working for one studio in town, which did a lot of narrative stuff, I kind of got into that aspect of it. And this is way before audiobooks. And so it's always been a mix of things that I do, music, film post, and narration. Nowadays with the internet, of course, it's not like it was in the old days where you're producing, an audio book for tape or anything like that. I mean, it could be anything for any client for the internet use. And I'm in the middle of a big project now that is about 170,000 words and about 5,000 cues that will be assimilated and probably up, I don't know, maybe later this year, next year. So it's a wide variety. And then I turn around and I have a tracking session the next day. So, but the audiobooks, in the early days when the audiobooks first started, I know we tried to get some clients there, and it was pretty easy until they figured out that if you had a star read the book, it would sell more. And instantly that business kind of shifted and went to New York and LA. And it still happens every now and then. I have a few clients that have a few authors that live close by. And, they'll come in occasionally, but it's not something I do every day now. And it's its own unique, just like every facet of what we do. I mean, film and television, they have their own unique set of disciplines, music, and also text-to-speech or any kind of dialogue narrative type stuff, their own specifications.
Great. Well, Maggie or Isra, do you have any questions for David?
Actually, yes. I was wondering, was the record label Spacefish?
Nope.
No, okay.
I haven't heard of that one.
There was an independent record label in Orlando in the early 80s, and it was run by somebody named Mike Brown. So I thought, well, maybe that's
nope, haven't heard of that
relation.
One.
Okay.
No, this was called Heartland Records, and we ultimately, the same year we started, we got a P&D deal with CBS Records, which was wonderful, and because that's serious distribution. At the time, CBS was the largest record company in the world. And I think Dick Asher was the fellow who signed us, brought us on. And then Walter Yetnikoff, who was his arch enemy within the CBS company, got promoted to president and immediately fired Dick Asher and got rid of everything that he did, which included our label. And
wow.
We found a small distributor to take its place. And then 3 years later, the exact same thing happened. New management, they came in, they got rid of all the distributed labels. By that time, the financial backers in the company, the people who were pouring money into this hole, basically said, we've had enough. And that was my left boot out into freelance work around town for a short period.
Yeah.
So.
Actually, I do have a question for you, David.
Yeah, sure.
How do you start on the audiobooks? Because recently I've been getting a couple of requests of on my studio of people wanting to do it, and I've noticed that the workflow is very profitable and a little bit more chill than many people. But how do you actually get that jump start to start working? Not on the practical side, more on the connection side. Like, who do you have to for example, in if you want to get to films, you want to talk to the music supervisors and stuff like that. Who do you have to talk or know once you start in the audiobook?
Well, that's a difficult question now. I've been in business so long that I haven't marketed in, I don't know when. The first 2 years, when I started in 90, I brought along a producer friend of mine from the last shop that I worked at, John Reams. And I said, I think we can make a go of this. And he was working, at the time, he was working as an associate producer at Nickelodeon when they were shooting in town. And so we worked really hard for a couple of years. We marketed heavily. We even went once to Manhattan and cold called on companies, which is, I wouldn't have the nerve to do that today, but we were young and we did. And we knew who we wanted to talk to, and we went to New York and did it. And the audiobooks, I do them. They're not a regular staple of what I do. But it's just over time, as our clientele built over time, and in that particular world, the publishing world, it's a pretty small community. If somebody is an editor at a particular publisher one day, they're going to move and they're going to be an editor at another one the other day, and it's just this revolving door. And once we started working with a few editors. Then every time they moved, we would get work and we would get called. Today, I mean, I think Audible is probably the largest independent one, I would imagine, which I've never done any work for Audible because there's no money in it. They're used to, unless it's a big book, I would imagine, but I know there's several voiceover talent in town that have their little home studio booths with their USB mics and all that business. And they'll flat rate them to narrate, edit, put it together and send it up to Audible. And if you've ever delved into Audible, the quality is all over the place. And so I would imagine you could get in touch with Audible would be one way. We even, in the very early days, we went after the Books for the Blind program, which the government runs. You know, every book and magazine that comes out, the U.S. government pays for that stuff to be recorded for people who are blind and can't read and so forth. And when we worked out the details of that, we even found that those budgets, somebody had to work for free. Either the studio had to work for free or the talent had to work for free. But there was not enough in the budget. And there was a large company at the time in Denver that was doing it. And how they did it was they coerced the talent into, this is a charity work, you come in and work for free and blah, blah, blah. And then the studio, that's how they made the living on it. But audiobooks, I have a budget, and if they can't meet it, I don't worry about it. They'll go somewhere else and find it cheaper. But I really don't know how you get into it if you're starting from scratch these days, except for just communicate, to book publishers and audiobook distributors.
Yeah, I think the who you know and the cold calling are the only two avenues that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you're in business a long time, the first 2 years of any business, as anybody who's started a business, the first 2 years are tough years. You've got, and in our business, not only do you have the technical stuff you've got to work out, but you got to work out all the other stuff, where my client's coming from. And once you get past the first 2 years and things start to stable out, I think it becomes easier for work to come in, because, like I said, in that particular field, it's a revolving door. People go from one place to the next place, to the next place. And if they had a good experience at your place, you can get rid of a headache for them. This is a headache for most of these editors. They really would rather shove it off on somebody and say, you handle it. And that happens in all the fields, in the film stuff that I get to do, and some of the music stuff. It's kind of repeat business, so to say.
Yeah, I have a dear friend who just won several awards for an Audible title, and he's a British producer who worked for the BBC for years, and he has just done the Neil Gaiman Sandman series, and that is definitely an area where Audible spent some money. James
Yes.
McAvoy and
Yes.
Isra Elba are all in the cast. So
they will spend it on a big book. Absolutely, they will. And we've had several books where Simon & Schuster used to send a producer down to do books, mainly because the authors were within this area. Rather than flying the author to New York, they would come down. Very particular. The technical requirements are usually pretty high. The noise floor in the studio has to be pretty good, and so it's a difficult technical hurdle to jump through, just like broadcast television is. It's not an easy target to hit broadcast television, and so there's a lot to it.
now I remember in the mid '90s when I first moved here to work for Sound Deluxe.
Yep.
Harcourt Brace was based in Orlando, I believe.
Yep. Harcourt Brace.
and there seemed to be a ton of business from them.
Well,
available.
I worked, they had a studio. I worked there in 87, started in 87. They had a studio called Quads. And what Quads was a post-production facility, audio, 1-inch video. And 10 of the people out of the 30 were computer guys. And they were trying to figure out, and Harcourt at the time was at that time the largest book publisher in the world. So they had content galore. And what they were trying to figure out at Quads was, how can we take all this content and with a PC be able to access it quickly and have it show up on the screen, and if there's a video attached, play it, and so forth. I mean, we take all that stuff for granted now during the internet. But back in the early 80s, mid to late 80s, they were trying to figure out how to do it. And I think Sound Deluxe, I think you guys were partnered with Philips on their CD interactive format.
They weren't directly. I was working for a company in Tallahassee called Interlight International, and we were doing the compact disc interactive. We were doing children's Bible titles.
Yeah.
And I built the first digital recording studio in the Southeast in Tallahassee for them.
Well, I remember we were partnered with Smithsonian, LucasArts, 2 or 3 other large content providers, because what Philips wanted to do is when they finally introduced the format, they wanted to make sure there was plenty of content, so the format had some legs and could be successful. Of course, it really didn't, but what they were trying to do is what everybody takes for granted now. Whenever you type into Google and say, show me whatever, and it comes up and there it is, and there's pictures and there's information. That's basically what Quads was doing. And I think Sound Deluxe maybe a little bit as well, probably. But anyway, that format did not work. And we regularly did a lot of programming for HBJ there. They owned SeaWorld. They owned Cypress Gardens. They owned all of that. And we would do all kinds of content for the organization and for all the affiliates that they owned across the country. And until they got in trouble, they sold SeaWorld to Anheuser-Busch. And then our studio was on SeaWorld property, and they said, you need to evacuate because we've got Shamu plush toys that we need to store here. And Harcourt was busted, didn't have enough money to move us. And so, that's how I basically started my own business. I kind of got tired of being part of these things, other people making what I thought were terrible decisions. And then all of a sudden you have to start all over again. So in 90, I said, okay, I'm going to do my own thing. And if it fails, then, I'm terrible at it. And if it succeeds, wow, pat myself on the back, we made it. And that kind of forced me into starting my own shop, so to say.
Sorry, my computer turned off, so I'm sorry.
You want me to repeat all that?
No. I'm good.
All right.
But I kind of disappeared for a while. It's not because I was bored or nothing. It's because
well, back to your basic question on audiobooks. I mean, you just have to kind of market and go out there and try to find them, and then hopefully the budgets you get are within something that works for your facility and for your talent.
What, Isra? I'm fascinated by this the wrestling theme music aspect of what you were doing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was more of a something that happened spontaneous for fun. So I've been operating Riverbear Studios for 5 years, and the first 3 years, like he said, the first 2 years was hard. Year number 3 was actually, we're finally, picking things up, and then boom, pandemic. Pandemic happens. I remember having about literally like 20 cancellations just like in a week. Hey, I can't do it. I don't know what's going to happen. And I was like, freaking out a little bit. Like, what am I going to do now? Because I made money strictly from recording artists, not so much from doing anything on the side. And I grew up being a wrestling fan. I always loved wrestling. I loved the production. And when I was in school, I had the opportunity to the school that I was at. They had a connection with WWE. And I had the opportunity to work backstage, coiling cables, helping the audio guys, stuff like that. And I got fascinated by the production. So one day I went to a wrestling show. I met one of the wrestlers, and he introduced me to literally like everybody. And from there, I told him like, hey, what if I make a song for you for free, just for fun? I made a song for him. Then I started getting calls. Hey, can you make me a song? Hey, can you give me a song? Hey, can you give me a song? And it got to the point that I've already done almost 100 wrestlers.
Wow.
And one of my songs currently every Saturday on Telemundo, because I do cater a lot for the Latin community. So I'm literally like every Saturday, like I have friends like, yo, I listened to your song on TV, and I'm like, cool. It sucks because I don't have cable. So I have Netflix and everything else, so I don't have cable, but I've got I got a little bit of it. So many wrestlers have like from almost every company, like they've used my songs to enter, and they're the best clients too, because I haven't had a single revision. They literally, they tell me what they want. I play the music, and boom, they love it. Usually I blow their expectations away.
That's great. That obviously that's knowing your market and knowing what they want.
Mm-hmm. And they it's like you got to be one of the boys for them to trust you. They don't go to any engineer for that stuff.
Great. Maggie, let's talk a little bit about punk rock in your PJs.
Okay.
How long has that show been running? You said 23 years?
23 years, yeah. Before that, I actually was on WPRK for some other shows, subbing in, and also there's a classical show that had to happen for a while per our charter. And so I did that classical show for about a year before they said, hey, can you sub in for someone? And I said, sure. And that eventually turned into Punk Rock in Your PJs.
Well, I'm curious how you think punk rock has changed in 23 years, because to me, that's kind of frozen in time, but I still see a lot of teenage bands saying they're playing punk. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like everybody's opinion on genres, everybody's got an opinion on it, and what is considered punk and what is not considered punk, and what they listened to back in the day is better, or what is out there now is better. Everybody has an opinion on that. I feel like it's just a rebellious spirit kind of is what you hear in any punk music, regardless of the decade. I've been very fortunate to be a part of interviews for different people from different times of punk. For example, I got to interview John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten from, the Sex Pistols. And so they were kind of a front runner of that punk music, that punk sound. But I've also been able to interview, there's a guy named Justin from the band Anti-Flag, who is more recent, but also they've been around since the 90s. So I guess not that recent, but ultimately, what those people are saying and their messages are kind of the same. And it's just, as the music industry changes, so does punk, but it's still kind of its own thing, I think.
Yeah, I think having rebelliousness as a criteria just makes it rock and roll. to
Right.
me. That's what it represents to me. I was fortunate enough to do the original demos for a band that was classified punk, but I think they're more new wave, Devo.
Oh, yeah.
They were very dear friends of mine from Ohio, and they definitely had a rebellious spirit. Their theory of de-evolution was kind of a masterstroke in being a social look at what's happening. And now they're sitting around saying, "See, we told you."
Right. Yeah. And that's a great example too, because there are a lot of bands like that some people are like, oh, that's punk. And some people are like, no, that's new wave. So I totally see what you mean there.
Well, good. Drigo, you got questions for any of our guests?
Yeah. So, in terms of like the punk thing, for example, like I have some friends that are in punk bands right now. And actually one of my friends just recorded a couple of their singles behind a Dunkin' Donuts. And, they actually, I found out that the producer who was working on it actually took some of our classes and stuff. But I guess the question is, what has been like one of the craziest stories that a band has told you in terms of like either recording or like, for example, like a stage situation or something like that?
Okay. I feel like the first thing that came to mind was when I can't remember the name of the band, but there was a local politician named Rich Crotty, and he was trying to stop something with clubs and live music. And so this band, and I can't believe I can't remember the name of it. They put on this thing called the Vigilante Bum Rush. And it was a concert that happened inside of a Kinko's. Very quickly, they played 1.5 songs. Tickets were sold in advance. It was all very hush hush. It was organized by Dave Plotkin, who did the 110 hours marathon on WPRK to try and break a world record for longest continuous broadcast, which was amazing. But he put this on, and they organized it. They had special tickets. They rushed into Kinko's, put up like blackout material on the windows because it was in a big like plaza, and set up, like brought in amps and everything and just started playing, and everybody just assembled. And what was really funny is when you walk in, you were handed one photocopy and a receipt from Kinko's. And the photocopy was a picture of a hand, and on it was written, "Rich Crotty can't stop my body." And so that was like your proof that you were there as a customer and not like loitering, I guess, because they wanted to make sure that the people who came in to see the show would not be arrested as best they could. I don't know that would have worked, but they tried, they were trying to do that. And they played 1.5 songs. And then someone said, they just called the cops. And so everybody broke it down. They pulled down all the blackout material. People who were there helped carry out amps and drums. I mean, they had like a full band there. And it was probably the wildest experience I've ever seen or been a part of or heard about in terms of something weird like that.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. I mean, I remember like during my high school days, I would go to like these punk concerts, and they were like you would just show up, park somewhere, and there would be no stage, just like people bringing in their things, and it would just be like behind somebody's garage or something that,
right.
And when you would ask like, oh, who do you know who lives here, or what's going on, they're like, no, there hasn't been any cars here for a month, so we just decided this would be perfect.
That's funny.
Well, I remember when the punk scene was getting started in northeastern Ohio, there were the rubber factories were starting to close, and there was a bar that was in financial difficulty right next to the Goodyear factory. So the guys in the Rubber City Rebels bought the bar, and I mean, it was literally a dive bar, and they named it the Crypt. And that was an example of the do-it-yourself spirit in action when if you couldn't find a place to play, you just bought one and started playing there. And that wound up being the place where Devo, the Rubber City Rebels, the Dead Boys, another band called Hammer Damage, which is my all-time favorite band name.
Yeah.
And so that definitely was how back in the mid-'70s it was done. I like the idea of playing behind a Dunkin' Donuts, though. That seems to be very punk, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Any more questions for anyone?
Actually, David, I noticed in a bio that I read about you that you have some experience in the gaming industry, like gaming music. And that is probably my kids' absolute favorite genre of music. So I just wanted to ask you about that.
Well, it wasn't music.
Okay.
But there was a period where EA Sports, which is over in Maitland, I think, they were in the process of building a studio, and they called and said, we have some projects and things to do. And our studio is not finished. And so I said, okay. And I knew that was going to be a 6-month run, because as soon as their studio was built, then they would be there. But I did a lot of gaming cues and things. I did mix a couple back in the NASCAR game. Back then, if you won the race, you went to the winner's circle, and Sweet Home Alabama would play. And I mixed that in 5-1, the victory song, so to say, and a couple others. But I worked on John Madden, mainly cues. I guess the biggest one of that period was somewhere around 2000, 2001. I can't remember exactly, but I did all of Tiger Woods' cues in the game, in his golf game. And that was probably the biggest out of the bunch that I did. I did all the Russian cues for, what was that, Battlefield 1942.
Oh, right.
So anytime a Russian gets killed or screams or whatever, I recorded all those. But it was short-lived, because once they got their studio done, then of course, it was off to other things. But gaming music is big. Out in LA mainly, out on the West Coast mainly, but it's a huge deal.
Yeah, my friend Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo,
Yes,
who, along
exactly.
with his film work, has done Crash Bandicoot. He's done all the Rugrats games.
Yep.
He continues to keep his hand in the gaming industry for sure.
Yeah, it's a big thing for music, and they have serious budgets for the games too.
Yeah, I think my wife had done some exploration of that, because she was a gamer and she'd been looking into getting into sync licensing music. And it's incredibly complicated for games now at this point, because there's so many branches. It's so immersive, and there's so many options that go on. It's I know my brain would explode trying to keep track of all that.
Yeah, video games, they're also becoming like more surreal as well. Like you're seeing things like Unreal, which is made usually for video games, now entering the film industry. So now we're seeing more of a cinematic thing with video games, and the budgets are so huge on the animation that it, like back in the day, they used to do like a bunch of video games per year. Now most companies, they do 1 or 2, but they put all the budget in that thing. And for like the audio people, because I've been dabbling a little bit in the video game world, and it is so complex. Like you gotta, like, they're putting orchestration, they're putting so many factors on it that it's like, oh my God, this is like working on a film.
Right. The budgets are very big, and of course that stuff doesn't land in Orlando usually. That stuff lands out on the coast. And I'm working for a company now that is a big audio supplier for games. So these gaming companies will come to them and say, okay, here's what we want. And they become the middleman sourcing out all the different elements that they need. And I'm doing some recording for that company now. And, but yeah, I mean, it's not something that I thought, I want to pursue. So I've never, if it comes, it comes, but it's not my thing.
I'm kind of wondering if there's a common ground between David and Isra in terms of the business. I don't know if this is a public announcement or not, but Riverbear Studios is closing.
Riverbear Studios, the general access, it is closed. The place is still operational, but now I found ways to make the studio more self-sufficient where I don't have the necessity for to work clients anymore. So it is closed for the artists coming, like calling and like the random client to call me. You know, now I'm just taking people that I know, and I'm entering into things like relaxation music, video game music, and stuff like that, where I don't have to have a client coming over. And I tried doing all those things, having the studio, but it was impossible. Like the amount of days that you have to, because we're one of the few studios that we usually do a bunch of like real instrumentations versus like just hip hop and stuff like that. So a band would take weeks to record, and after recording, you don't want to spend hours editing and making sound for video games and stuff like that. So it is in that transitioning of closing for the general public, but still open for professionals. So like usually I'm only working with people I get through LinkedIn instead of like from Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that.
Great. Well, I think we might have come to the end of this podcast. I want to thank you for joining us on the Real to Real podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Hensal, and with my co-host Drigo, and I'd like to thank our guests Maggie Finley, Isra Batista, and David Brown. We have so much more in store coming up on future episodes. So make sure and like and subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcasting app. Join us next month for another episode with another exclusive look at life behind the board in the music industry, when our guests will be Joe Vitale and Michael Bronstein. And thank you to Carol Hensel for our theme music.
Orange County Library System's Melrose Center is now open. Come rediscover all we have to offer. Innovate in our Fab Lab. Create in our editing bays and sound booths. Experience our simulators. Produce, capture, and direct in our audio,
This is the rap.
photo, and video studios. Plan your visit now at ocls.info/Melrose or call 407-835-7323.